Are we rolling? Yes, we are. What's up, guys? It's your boy McKinley Crain here, and today I'm going to be doing my spoiler-free review of Star Wars: The Bad Batch, Season 1, Episode 3. Now, let's get into it. So, for those of you who don't already know, Star Wars: The Bad Batch is a recent 2021 Disney Plus original, which is canon to the Star Wars movies and is a spin-off of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, the CG version, of course. Um, and it's an action show. So yeah, and this is episode 3. Um, and in this episode, okay, before I say anything else, for those of you who don't know, the Bad Batch are a um, kind of like they're like a genetically enhanced group of clones that are that when they were having their chips implanted inside of their heads or whatever, because that's apparently what happens in like the Star Wars universe, like to the clones or whatever, when they're like cloning them or whatever, they're like, they're like after they like fertilize the egg or whatever, and they kind of like genetically engineer the egg a little bit. The human egg, that's what I mean. Not a chicken egg. I don't know why I felt like I had to clarify that, but I just did. So yeah, they like genetically engineer the fetus or whatever, the baby. And so what happened to these clones is usually the little chip makes it where like the clones follow every order ever that they're given, but these clones didn't get that. They got their little chip or whatever and it gave them, like enhanced abilities or whatever. But it it didn't like control them. It made it where they could make their own decisions and think for themselves. And so that's why they're called the Bad Batch. That's why they were originally called the Bad Batch, because they're like a bad batch of clones. Defects, kind of. So, continuing with the story of episode 3. So, in this episode, the Bad Batch and Omega are continuing their little quest or journey, whatever you would call it, or mission, to kind of get away from the Empire that was trying to terminate them because they were afraid that they were going to go rogue, and they were afraid that they were going to go rogue or had already gone rogue because of some of the decisions that they had made and other stuff that happened in episode 1. And they were they were also gonna the Empire was also gonna try to terminate Omega because Omega because of some of the things that Omega had done, and Omega although she was a clone, she could also she didn't have a chip. I don't think she did. Anyway, so yeah, that's why they're gone, and they're continuing their quest to get away from the Empire. And in this episode, they go to they crash land on an alien planet and have to deal with a lot of the stuff there. And this episode has a lot of action in it. and you know, it has the Bad Batch and it has Omega in it. Like it, like, you know, this episode once again, like, you know, focuses on these characters the most. There is like a side story about, like, you know, some of the, well, like a side plot about like some of what's happening with the Empire. But, you know, the A plot is, you know, the Bad Batch and Omega on the alien planet, and it's really fun to watch. And there's actually a lot of character development in this episode, which is great. And there's a lot of action in this episode, which is great. This is just a perfect episode of a perfect season of a perfect series so far. And it's really fun to watch. I love the character chemistry in this episode, especially between Omega and the other characters, like, you know, a few of the other characters, like between Omega and Hunter. Hunter is, for those of you who don't know, Hunter is, like, you know, the leader of the Bad Batch. You know, all of the character chemistry in this episode is perfection. It's perfect, but, you know, I think that the best example would have to be, you know, the character chemistry between Hunter and Omega. Anyway, this entire show is great. This entire episode is great. This entire episode is perfect. Was this episode as good as episode 1 of the Bad Batch? No, but it was better than episode 2. And I love this episode. It's a really fun episode. You know, it's got some humor in it, and the humor in it is really awesome and works very well and is perfect. And it's got some really the writing in this episode is clever, and the whole mythology of this episode is just awesome, and I really love what it does to, like, the Star Wars canon, like, you know, what this show is doing to the Star Wars canon, not just this episode, to the Star Wars canon, not this Star Wars canon, to the Star Wars canon. I think that this show and this episode are just really making the Star Wars canon a lot more interesting. The Star Wars canon was always and was already super interesting, but this show and this episode are just making the Star Wars canon even more interesting. With like all these new, like, just plot lines about, like, you know, what happened to the clones and everything, and it works very well. This episode was just perfection, and it's awesome, and I love it, and I can't wait for the next episode. Anyway, I'm going to give this episode a 100% out of a 100%, which is the equivalent of an A+. Like, subscribe, join the notification squad. I will return.